Kinda night and day, huh? Well, that's the difference between default and optimized graphics settings. If you're on PC and tired of the game looking dark and blurry, this guide's for you. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how you can get your game looking like this, as well as how you can tweak and tune it to make it look any way you'd like. And don't worry, whether you're brand new to PC gaming or just want DVD to look cleaner, I'll do my best to keep things simple and easy to follow. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. Hi, sorry to interrupt. While editing this, I realized that I was yapping a lot, and I thought that for some of you that might just want to know what settings to use without knowing all the reasons behind choosing those settings, I'd give you a quick run through of the settings I use. So if you head on over to the settings, then graphics, under quality, it says ultra, but you should put it on low. And I explained that more in the longer-winded explanation, but for now just put it on low. Then for auto adjust, have it on off, screen resolution 100. Full screen mode should be windowed full screen. 16:9 aspect ratio off, VSync off. FPS limit should be 120 if you have a fast PC or 60 if you have a slower one or an old laptop or something. And if you have a bit of a weaker PC that lags, you can enable FSR. However, if you have a strong PC that doesn't stutter or anything, turn off FSR because it's just gonna make the game look blurry. The same goes for XESS, it's just a worse version of FSR, so you always want that disabled. As for anti-aliasing, I keep it off. I recommend to keep it off, but the hair will look a bit pixelated and weird. So if you really like how the hair looks and just have to have that non-pixelated hair, then have it on, otherwise turn it off because it will make the game look both clearer, cleaner, sharper. It's just, TAA is the bane of gaming, I swear to God. And the final setting is the in-game HUD scale. Now, that was just if you like the UI that I have a bit smaller than normal, then you can put it on 70, which is what I use. And finally, there was one more setting that wasn't graphics, it was audio, but it's still really important. You should go into the audio settings and disable the headphone mode. I explain later on why you should disable it, but just know that it's bad to have enabled. It will make directions way more difficult to hear than with it disabled, even if you have headphones. So before we dive into graphics filters and file tweaks, let's start with the things you can change right inside Dead by Daylight. These settings are the easiest to access, but they still make a huge difference. So boot up the game and I'll explain each setting, what it does, why it's important, and my recommended settings. To enter the game settings, press this cog on the bottom left of the screen. This will bring you to the General tab with options. From here, we want to go to the Beta tab. Now this setting is optional and only for killers, but here you can choose any field of view value between 87 degrees, which is very zoomed in, all the way to 103 degrees, which is why I use. Not only does this help with seeing things at the edge of the screen, but if you're like me and struggle with motion sickness in games, this setting helps tremendously. Next up is the Graphics tab. Click on Graphics at the top of the screen, and you should see a bunch of settings like this. Let's start on the top. The quality setting is actually a bunch of preset graphics settings that change a lot of values. If you have a powerful PC, odds are this is set to Ultra. And for me, it also says Ultra, but that's actually a bug. I have changed all my settings from the low preset and would advise you to do the same, since the overall quality setting changes a lot of invisible values that we cannot tweak without going into the configuration files, which we will do later. But for now, set this to low. You will notice the game looks a lot worse than before, but don't worry. This is just how the game looks before we've applied our manual graphics settings, so this is not the final look of the game. The next setting is Auto Adjust. This can be toggled between on and off. It is always better to toggle this setting off, especially if you have a powerful PC. What this does is increase or lower the resolution dynamically to improve performance on weak PCs. However, even on weak PCs, I would recommend changing the next setting instead, as it does the same thing but better. The screen resolution setting is a bit misleading, because in most games it changes your resolution, but in Dead by Daylight, this is actually what other games refer to as resolution scaling, which is a feature that lowers the resolution by a percentage to improve performance at the cost of quality. This setting is mainly here for weak PCs, so if your PC never stuttered or lagged before this guide, you should put it on 100%. This makes sure that the game runs in full resolution, looking as good as possible. For screen size, this is the actual resolution setting. So this should always be the same as your screen's resolution. If you don't know what this means, just leave it to default. For the next one, full screen mode is a bit tricky. The optimal setting in theory is full screen, since Dead by Daylight runs in DirectX 12. However, from my experience, there seems to be a bug with the full screen mode in Dead by Daylight. It may cause huge stutters when you tab in and out. And for most people, this doesn't matter since windowed full screen, also referred to as borderless, works really well and doesn't have these stutters. However, if you want to shave a milliseconds or two off the game latency or increase performance by less than 1%, you could try fiddle around with full screen. Otherwise, set it to windowed full screen. As for aspect ratio, this only matters if you have an ultra-wide. If you don't know what that means, leave it to off. Now VSync is a topic I could go on for days about, but the gist of it is if you have screen tearing, turn it on, and if you want improved compatibility, less bugs, maximum performance and the lowest possible latency, turn it off. I have it off since I never experienced screen tearing in Dead by Daylight. The FPS limit, well, it limits your frame rate. If you have a strong PC, I would recommend increasing it to the highest possible, which is 120. However, if you're playing on a weaker PC or have a cheap screen, you might want to reduce it to 60. I should however mention that even the cheapest gaming monitors these days go to 144, so most of you should have this setting at 120. The next setting is very complicated. All you really need to know about FSR is that it's a more advanced version of resolution scaling, which we talked about earlier. If you have a powerful PC, leave it off, and if you suffer from motion sickness like me, this has to be off no matter what, since it introduces a lot of ghosting, which may make you very motion sick. However, if you don't suffer from motion sickness and play on a weaker PC, this may serve as a better alternative to the screen resolution setting from earlier, so feel free to play around with it. As for XESS, it's just another, usually worse version of FSR, so leave it off. Now, in my opinion, this is the most important setting to change in order to make the game look good. Dead by Daylight uses Unreal Engine, which has a highly efficient TAA anti-aliasing method. It barely impacts performance and looks incredibly well, but it often makes the game look blurry and introduces a lot of ghosting. So, if you suffer from motion sickness, this has to be turned off. However, for the rest of you, this is an optional setting. I prefer it turned off as it makes the game a lot sharper and clearer. The only drawback is that the hair in Dead by Daylight is rendered with TAA in mind, so when you do disable the anti-aliasing, it might look pixelated like this. While I will show you an alternative anti-aliasing method through ReShade in just a bit, they only fix the jagged edges around objects, so unfortunately there is nothing you can do about the hair. If the hair is a deal breaker for you, leave it on, otherwise I strongly recommend turning anti-aliasing off. Everything will look a lot sharper and cleaner that way. Then finally, for the graphics tab, we have the in-game UI scale. If you like the slightly smaller UI that I play with, turn it down to 70%. Otherwise, you can leave it at default. Now, before we leave the settings menu, there is actually one important setting I would recommend everyone to turn off. This isn't exactly a graphics option, but it helps me and many others tremendously in hearing from what direction sounds come from. If you go to the audio tab, you'll find this headphone setting. While it may seem intuitive to turn this on if you use headphones, it's actually detrimental to hearing directions. The reason is that this setting enables a thing that's called speaker crosstalk emulation, which is a very complicated topic. All you need to know is turning this off will make it much easier to hear from what direction a sound is coming from. And as a spirit main, this of course is very important to me. With that out of the way, that's the in-game settings done. Now that your base settings are solid, it's time to tweak the configuration file to really fine-tune the graphics. With the in-game settings done, close the game. Closing the game first is actually important to make sure that the configuration files we're about to tweak are updated with the new settings. So once the game is closed, press the Windows button and R. This will open the Run window. In here, type app data. This will open File Explorer and take you to this folder. Double-click Local and you should see a long list of folders. scroll to the Dead by Daylight folder and double-click it. From here, open the saved folder, then config. The next folder depends on what game version you have. If you're playing through Steam, open the Windows Client folder. If you're on Epic Games, it's the EGS folder. Finally, if you're playing through Microsoft Store or Game Pass, open the WinGDK folder. Once you've opened the folder for your version, you should see something like this. First off, scroll down to the Engine.ini file and open it with Notepad. While in the file, scroll all the way down to the bottom and add the following. I will put the lines in the description so you can copy and paste them. This will remove mouse acceleration, which is a feature that estimates how fast you want to turn the mouse. Disabling this feature makes your mouse inputs a lot more consistent, so if you ever felt like the camera moved faster or slower than normal sometimes, this will no longer happen. Save the file by clicking File and Save or hitting Ctrl+S. Then we want to return to File Explorer and find the GameUserSettings.ini file. Open up that one in Notepad as well. The main thing we want to change here are the scalability groups. If you know what all this means, feel free to change them the way you want them. Otherwise, I suggest copying my settings, which is 40300030004. Now, these settings should make the game less cluttered and remove unnecessary effects. Then save the file and close Notepad. Now, if you've watched other guides, you might be wondering why I'm not telling you to put the file on read-only. So here's the thing. People recommend you to put this file specifically on read-only, as the game might otherwise overwrite our settings. And that's sort of true, but also not. So the game only writes to the file, meaning it overwrites your settings, when you change a setting option. So if you never touch the graphics settings in-game, these settings should stay. And not having the file on read-only is much more convenient, since all the settings in-game are tied to this file. This means that if you one day want to change a control option like mouse sensitivity, it will revert every time you restart the game, if the file is in read-only. So generally, I advocate for people to not set this file to read-only, since it's more convenient and won't change things so long as you don't change graphics settings in-game. So, with the game settings set up, it's time to download ReShade. Before I talk about how to install ReShade, I'd like to address some concern people have. I've seen countless threads online worrying about ReShade and whether or not you can get banned for using it. The truth is yes and no. Yes, you can get banned for ReShade in some games, but not in Dead by Daylight. See, Dead by Daylight uses Easy Anti-Cheat as their anti-cheat service, and Easy Anti-Cheat have actually whitelisted the ReShade application, and give the game developers themselves the option to allow or disallow ReShade in their game. So, since ReShade works in Dead by Daylight, this is a direct consent given from behavior to use ReShade with Dead by Daylight. And even if they were to change their mind one day, ReShade will simply stop working. It is impossible to get banned by the anti-cheat in Dead by Daylight for using ReShade. And anyone that claims they have been banned for ReShade either lies and cheated, or found a way to exploit ReShade to cheat, which will have made behavior ban their account manually. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's continue with the guide. When you're ready, head on over to ReShade's website, link in description, and press the big download button. That should take you to this part of the page. We want to download the normal version of ReShade. Do not download ReShade with full add-on support. That version will not work with Dead by Daylight, and the anti-cheat will not allow the game to run. Once you have downloaded the normal version of ReShade, head on over to your downloads in the File Explorer and run the file. When you run ReShade, this window should pop up. Enter Dead by Daylight in the search window and something like this will pop up. Make sure that you are selecting Dead by Daylight with the DPD icon for this to work. Click on it and click Next. Choose the DirectX 10, 11, 12 option and click Next. Once you do that, you should be able to see the effect to install. Press the Uncheck All in the top right, then check All. It will download all the shaders, which might take a while, and once it's done, simply press Finish and ReShade will be installed. And once ReShade is installed, you can open the game. Once you boot up the game, you should get a window like this at the top. The default keybind to open the overlay should be Home. Once you have the overlay open, head on over to Settings, and on the overlay key setting, you can rebind opening and closing the overlay to any key you'd like. I chose page down because I don't have a home key on my keyboard. Once you're done, head back to the Home tab. Here you can see all the available filters, and for now everything will be unchecked. On my screen, some might be checked, but that's just because I have my filter applied. To install my ReShade filter, head down to the description and download the ReShade file. I put it on my Google Drive, so you should be able to download it freely. Once you have it downloaded, go back into the game, open the overlay and press that little file icon. That should open the Explorer and take you to ReShade's root folder. Take the ReShade preset file you downloaded from the description and drop it into ReShade's root folder. That will install the ReShade filter automatically. Just open the overlay, press this drop down, and you should find my ReShade preset as an option. My ReShade preset aims to increase the brightness and contrast a bit, add SMAA anti-aliasing, as well as some sharpening to really get that snappy look. I also added a negative vignette to remove the slight vignette the game normally has. Finally, I added some vibrance and slight color correction to make the game look as I believe it should. This preset should look good on all monitors, and looks absolutely amazing on OLED screens. However, I saw some comments asking for one of my old presets, which adds this hot pink look to the game. In order to achieve this, all you need to do is add the effect Daltonize to your preset. It should be right below Technicolor 2. Once you've added Daltonize, if you look at the bottom half of the overlay, you should see this new tab called Daltonize.fx. Change the setting to Deuteranopia, and there you go! Just make sure that the Daltonize effect is at the bottom of your active effects, so that it applies last. Once you're done tweaking your settings in ReShade, make sure to save on the top right, then check Performance mode. This will lock your settings, meaning you can't change them, but it increases performance slightly. Once you have everything set up, it's all done. You shouldn't have to do anything more, everything will just work as soon as you start the game. I do, however, just quickly want to show you how to update ReShade. It's really easy. So sometimes you start the game and it will tell you to update ReShade on the top. While it isn't necessary to update all the time, it is good to do every couple months or so, as there may be bug patches and performance improvements. All you need to do is to close the game, head on over to ReShade's website again, download the newest version of ReShade and run the file. This time when you select Dead by Daylight, it will prompt you to update instead of download. I personally always select the update ReShade only to make sure my settings don't get removed or changed by the update, but you should be fine choosing whichever. And that's about it. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you so much for watching. Good luck out there in the fog, and as always, have a fantastic day.